Hi, I'm Megan Matson, and I am going to be reading Be Happy, Be Free. No, really. And this is day 19 of the working injury. You have to be in the moment in order to get through the moment. And of course, it's natural to be distressed or upset. But what you shouldn't be is anxious or lonely, because that is the state that makes authoritarianism possible. That is a quote from the great Timothy Snyder, a historian who will show up several times in the reading below. We have soup, we have bread and chilled butter, books by the fire. What could be wrong? I jollied to my dad, the butter lover, where we sat side by side, being served like royals before the wood stove. My kind husband had roasted garden peppers with parsnips and herbs and butternut squash and had blended the lot into a real triumph. There were dogs flung about, dozing in the warmth. And the bread. The bread is a point of local pride and a destination purchase for many. The dad who makes it owns with his wife a restaurant where everything is that good and where kids in town often get their first jobs. One time, our family ran into the bread baker's daughter outside a detention camp on the US-Mexico border. She was waiting in 105-degree heat with a news crew for a group of elected officials to arrive. Are you from home? She asked. It was the winner t-shirt our daughter wore that did it. Just 60 of those very local shirts are printed each year for the winning 4th of July tug-of-war teams. No consolations awarded. Yes, was the answer. We stood together in a slim band of shade, hearing how her father had tinkered for years to get that bread starter right. I looked past her shoulder at the low, tent-like buildings that made up the detention camp. It was distant and silent behind cyclone fences and razor wire. There was a rustling of cameras. The electeds had arrived at our sun-blasted outpost and were gathering to speak. Our family had had no plan when 3 of us flew the 1,200 miles from home to be here. But we did have markers and poster board, because I believed then, and am trying to believe now, that one should always have markers and poster board. We used the open hours that morning to squat on asphalt in that same band of shade, making signs with our markers just in case. As the speakers now assembled before microphones and the tiniest of crowds pulled in close, a low voice nudged us and our signs to sidle into camera view behind the people speaking. I knew from old days organizing that a livelier photograph for the press was the key to getting stories run. America is brown, get over it, said my sign. A border shack guard had been talking to me as I started in with my markers, of his Mexican and his Native American great-grandmothers. Both grannies remembered brown Texas before it was white America, and neither paid much attention to the border as it shifted up and down around their lives. And black people, he added, been here 400 years. Come on. God bless the press, read our daughter's sign, cheeky to left and to right. The vitriol against journalists was still a new thing then. A national newsman had bent to say he was moved to see her making that sign. He had been harassed earlier at his hotel there in deep Texas and was still shocked. The press, the news, was imperfect then, but it still felt big, sturdy, and defendable enough against attack that day. Now MSNBC is for sale, CNN lays off by the bushel, Twitter, no, now Blue Sky accounts get more eyes than the cables, and there is no real economy for reporters. I won't even mention the papers. News, intact, was the only reason we were there at the border that day. Word of the family separations had started breaking big across all channels earlier in the week. Archaically, we had been watching the news on TV together when we saw an anchor having a hard time reading the awful story as it hit. We sat in such dismay, our faces wet with shame. There was no answer but yes when an anguished journalist said into the camera from the darkness outside a camp, "People need to get down here." My dad, watching with us that night, said, "That's the look the journalists had in Vietnam." This all happened 6 years ago. I don't want to be a harder, more isolated careful and selfish person today, just because these ghastly dope crimers and their jackass voters grabbed another election. A yoga prayer this morning went, "May all beings everywhere be happy. May all beings everywhere be free." I sat sweating and thought first, but everyone's miserable, until I boot that thought on through and reminded myself, it is a prayer, schmuck. Pray it. I don't know how this slipped under my door when I, like so many others, had bunkered myself away from all noise since the night of the 5th, but I managed to hear the great historian and author Timothy Snyder on with Ali Velshi of MSNBC. Here's one exchange. Velshi: "Well, it feels hopeless to some who may be watching and maybe some who aren't because they can't take any more news this week. The point is, you are not a different person than you were. The circumstances around you have changed by virtue of this election, but you remain the same person despite who becomes the president of the United States." Snyder answered, "That is exactly what the lesson is. You have stated it so beautifully. You have to make sure you remain that person, which is what freedom means. When things change around you, you continue to be that person. And in so doing, you do constructive work, set an example for others, meet new people trying to remain themselves." That is the answer to a puzzle texted by a dear friend treading water in this same November distress. She said, "I am not sure of anything anymore. I thought good was the way to go." Good is the way to go. Be who you were before the election, because it is the key to remembering how to stay free. Another Snyderism is, countries aren't free, only people are free. We just have to be more complex people now. Elections reduce all values to a binary and simplified intensity, when in true life, many things must manage to be true at the same time. It is true that I am happy and I am free in my insides and in this big, gorgeous world and with my people and books and in this helpful body. But it is true, as Snyder writes, Harris voters are upset because they love our country. I am upset. I am anguished for my country, for young people, the free world, and for the more suffering and great wrongs ahead. Happiness and anguish have to wrap together like whipped cream and lemon curd. Taste how sweet it is you feel as keenly as you do. Warm cooperation, says Snyder. Not so much guardrails, he continues, but well springs and safe houses, things we build together that flower, that bloom, that encourage other people to act. He continued, the things that exist are going to be things we create. Recall that the separations were stopped. Our earnest spectacle of speakers, bodies, and cameras in heat and desolation was repeated, one camp after another, and it worked. Most, but by no means all, of the children we saw hooded on flights and loaded off buses by night to locations unknown and for what, were eventually painfully located and reunited. The press as we knew it may be in collapse today, but there is a riot of excellent voices and wisdom rampaging onward through books, podcasts, Substack, YouTube, town meetings, independent efforts like ProPublica, The Guardian, Courier News, Civic Media, PBS NewsHour, Amanpour, local papers that keep chugging along, local radio, and each other. You can't put free back in the box that easy. Some even more interesting news is that we are all somehow morally and energetically ridiculously connected. As the 48.3% of total votes cast that were for Harris, we are a bit of an organism. Together as though by bat signal, people, us, felt the same voltage surge through us in those same hours that afternoon of July 21st when the big change happened. Together as though by bat signal, we all by the millions jumped right the fuck off of whatever news was left 19 days ago with similar parting cries. Long form, we shouted, books, the moon, art, and tending my own shit. Their bed, their lay. As I resolved, historians, philosophers, my God, so much I do not know about women. And Season finally fucking two of the diplomat. Oh, grace and mercy. You can't explain away these electric moves through the 48.3% of votes cast organism by silos or choirs or bubbles or media. It just happened too fast. And the same on July 21st and the same on November 5th. Again together, if anyone cares to know, the pro-us hearts and minds boosted that cheerful platform Blue Sky past 22 million users in a great surge away from the bad Mad Max troll trenches of Twitter. Yes, the blue side just left Twitter, smoking on the horizon behind them, fighting amongst themselves. No expert institutional leadership or press or structure made that happen all at once. In other oddities, an unusual number of people have been mentioning their nervous systems, and the tiny yoga class I go to more than doubled in size since the 5th and is holding. This animal sensibility that is connected enough to react without prompt in the same minutes of the same day is not everything, but it's something. Just as the family separations earthquaked across us in 2018 and shock went to action and eventually remedy, so we are this odd giant organism again this time, reacting morally again. Let's pay attention to our unspeaking connection. Protect our consciousness against a repeat orange occupation in these next years, and still figure out who to help, who to read, what to create, and maybe how to make every problem harder for those aspiring thugs thumbs-upping it at their perpetual Dacron Monsters Ball at Mar-a-Lago. Back by that fire mentioned pages ago, spoons in our soup, I note the butter is cold enough to hold its own against our bread's toasty roughness. Our books are entrancing. We both only read a few best lines out loud to each other, or clank a knife through more butter, but are otherwise silent. We will wake to the pall again tomorrow, as we have the past 18 mornings, but as our own selves, anguished and curious on one layer, remembering how to chase happy and free on another, and mostly just ready to be more complex. Let more be true at the same time. As Snyder writes in another of his post-election pieces, while we can't change everything, we can change the way we think. We can clear away the cliches and make ourselves more lively.